you know about nomads? Nomads are people who do not live in one place but move from one area to another to earn their living. In many parts of India, we can see pastoralists on the move with their herds of goats and sheep or camel and cattle. Pastoralism has been important in societies like India and Africa for years. Pastoralism is a way of keeping animals such as cattle, sheep that involves moving from one place to another to find water and food. Pastoralists are unable to be remembered in our history, or the focus runs parallel to agriculture and industry. Sometimes you read about artisans, but rarely about pastoralists. Why pastoralists were an important part of society like India and Africa? How colonialism did impacted their lives and how they have coped the pressure of modern society? Let's understand the answer through the chapter 5, Pastoralists in Modern World. Consider the first topic, movement of pastoral nomads in mountains. Mainly, pastoral communities are found in mountainous regions. Gujar Bakarwals of Jammu and Kashmir are great herders of goat and sheep. Many of them migrated here in the 19th century in search of pastures for their cattle and settled here. In winter, when the mountains were covered with snow, they lived with their herds in the low hills of Sivalik range. In summer, when the snow melted in the mountains and mountainsides were left lush green, they moved on to high levels. The variety of sprouted grass provided rich, nutritious forage for their animals. By the end of September, they used to start moving again for their downward journey back to their winter base. Several households came together for this journey, forming a kafilia. Mandabs of Ringal. The Gujar cattle herders live in the mandabs made of ringal, a hill, bamboo and grass from the Bugyal. A mandab was also a workplace. Here, Gujar used to make ghee, which they took down for sale. In recent years, they have begun to transport the milk directly in buses and trucks. These mandabs are about 10,000 to 11,000 feet, as buffaloes cannot climb any higher. Next, Gadi Shepherds. Gadi Shepherds is a pastoral community of Himachal Pradesh. They had a similar cycle of seasonal movements like Gujar Bakarwals of Jammu and Kashmir. Movement of Gadi Shepherds. During winter, Gadi Shepherds graze their flocks in scrub forests of the low hills of Sivalik range. By April, they moved north and spent the summer in Lahul and Spiti. Further to the east, in Garhwal and Kuman, the Gujar cattle herders came down to the dry forest of the Bhabhar in the winter and went up to the high meadows, the Bugyals, in summer. Many of the Gujar cattle herders were originally from Jammu and Kashmir and came to the uphills in the 19th century in search of good pastures. When the snow melted on the high mountains, they moved on to higher mountain meadows, that is dhars. By September, they began their return movement. On the way, they stopped once again in the villages of Lahul and Spiti, reaping their summer harvest and sowing their winter crop. Next one, Dhangas. Dhangas were an important pastoral community of Maharashtra. Their population was estimated to be 467,000 during the early 20th century. Most of them were shepherds, but some were blanket weavers and some other were buffalo herders. During monsoon, the Dhangas used to stay in the central plateau of Maharashtra. Apart from herding their animals, they also used to grow bajra. By October, they used to harvest their bajra and started their march to west to reach Konkan. They were welcomed by Kongani peasants. Dhangar flocks food on the stable and manured the fields with their dung. Next one, Golas. The Golas lived in the plateaus of Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. They were cattle herders. Next one, Kurumas and Kurubas. The Kurumas and Kurubas also lived in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. They reared sheep and goats and sold blankets. They used to live near the forest and cultivated on small patches of land. They were also engaged in petty traders. For the pastoralists of the central plateau, it was the alteration of monsoon and dry season which governed their seasonal migration. They used to move to the coastal area during dry season and go back to the central plateau during monsoon. Next one, Banjaras. The Banjaras lived in villages of Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra. They used to move long distance in search of good pastoral land. They sold plough cattle and other items in exchange for grain and fodder. Next one, Raikas. The Raikas lived in the deserts of Rajasthan. During the monsoon, the Raikas of Barmer, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur and Bikaner used to stay in their home villages because pasture was available. By October, they used to move in search of other pasture and water. They returned again the next monsoon. The Maru, that is a group of Raikas, herded camels and another group reared the sheep and goat. Okay friends, now we are moving on to the most important topic, that is colonial rule and pastoral life. The life of pastoralists changed dramatically under the colonial rule. The colonial rulers wanted to transform all grazing land into cultivated farms. This was necessary to increase land revenue. Additionally, increasing the cultivated land was necessary for increasing their production of jute, cotton and wheat, which were required in England. See, wasteland rules. Wasteland rules were enacted in different parts of the country from the mid-19th century. Under these rules, uncultivated lands were taken over and given to select individuals. These individuals were encouraged to settle on these land and were granted various concessions. Some of them were made headmans of villages in the newly cleared areas. The expansion of cultivated land resulted in significant reduction in grazing grounds. This created huge problem for the pastoralist. Forest Act. New forest acts were enacted by the mid-19th century. Under these acts, many forests were declared reserved. Pastoralists were not allowed in these reserved forests. Some other forests were classified as protected. The pastoralists got some grazing rights in the protected forest, but their movement were highly restricted. These forest acts changed the lives of pastoralists. They could not enter many areas and entry to some other areas was restricted. So, instead of following the seasonal cycle, they were forced to follow the new Forest Act, which disturbed their traditional way of life. Next one, Criminal Tribes Act. The nomadic people were viewed with suspicion by the colonial rulers. The Criminal Tribes Act was passed in 1871. Many communities of craftsmen, traders and pastoralists were classified as criminal tribes under this act. They were forced to live in notified villages only and the police official kept a watch on them. The colonial government looked for very possible source of taxation in order to increase its revenue income. Tax was imposed on land, on canal water, on salt, on trade goods and even on animals. See about grazing tax. Grazing tax was introduced in the mid-19th century in most of the pastoral tracts of India. Tax was calculated on the basis of per head of cattle. The tax rate went up rapidly and the tax collection system was made more efficient. The right to collect the tax was auctioned in the contractors between 1850s and 1880s. These contractors tried to extract as high a tax as possible to recover their investment. By 1880s, the government began to directly collect taxes from the pastoralists. See about changes in the lives of pastoralists. The availability of pasture land decreased drastically. This resulted in continuous intensive grazing of the remaining pasture. Unlike in the past, the lack of seasonal movement of pastoralists did not allow time for the natural restoration of vegetation growth. This created shortage of forage for animals and the animal stock deteriorated. Most of the cattle died due to shortage of fodder. Okay friends, from this I am raising a question. How did pastoralists cope with these changes? See that. Some of the pastoralists reduced the number of cattle in their herds. Some others discovered new pastures. For example, when the Raikas could not longer move into Sindh after the partition of 1947, they began to migrate to Haryana in search of new pastures. Some rich pastoralists began to buy land to settle down and gave up their nomadic life, while some of them became peasants. Some others took to more extensive trading, but the poor pastoralists had to borrow from money lenders in order to survive. Most of them finally lost their cattle and sheep and became laborers. Moving on to the next topic, pastoralism in Africa. Over half of the world's pastoral population lives in Africa. Even today, more than 22 million Africans depends on some form of pastoral activity. Bedouins, Berbers, Maasai, Somali, Boran and Turkana are some of the pastoral communities of Africa. Most of them live in the semi-arid grasslands or arid deserts. They raise cattle, camels, goats, sheep and donkeys, and they sell milk, meat, animal skin and wool. Some also earn through trade and transport. Some others combine pastoral activity with agriculture. Many others do a variety of odd jobs to supplement their earnings. Where have the grazing lands gone? Before the colonial rule, the Masai land stretched over a vast area from North Kenya to the steppes of northern Tanzania. The European colonial powers began the slicing up of Africa in order to get control of the African continent during the late 19th century. The Masai land was cut into half in 1885. An international boundary separated the British Kenya and German Tanganyika. During the First World War, the British took the control of Tanganyika. Due to these developments, the Maasai lost more than 60% of their pasture land from the pre-colonial period. They were now confined to the arid zone with poor pastures and uncertain rainfall. From the late 19th century, the local peasant communities were encouraged by the British government to expand cultivation. While the Maasai used to dominate the agricultural neighbors before the colonial rule, the situation had changed now. Large areas of grazing land were also turned into game reserves. Example, the Masai Mara and Samburu National Park in the Kenya and Serengeti Park in Tanzania. The Maasai could no longer hunt nor graze their animals in these areas. Next one, Cocoland herders. The Cocoland herders traditionally moved between Cocoland and Oambulon in Namibia. They sold skin, meat and other items in neighboring markets. The new system of territorial boundaries restricted their movement and stopped their activities. That is, the borders are closed. Let's see about it. With the redrawing of borders, the movement of all the pastoralist communities was severely restricted. They were required to get special permits in order to move. Getting a permit was often difficult. People were severely punished for violating the rules. They were also not allowed to enter the markets in white areas. Next one, when pastures dry. Before the colonial rule, seasonal movement was time-tested way to tide over the periods of drought in particular area. Since the movement was restricted, so a large number of Maasai cattle died because of starvation and diseases in the years of drought. In 1930, the Maasai in Kenya possessed 7,20,000 cattle, 8,20,000 sheep and 1,71,000 donkeys. Within just 2 years of severe drought, 1933 and 1934, more than half of the cattle in Maasai Reserve died. Not all were equally affected. During the pre-colonial period, the Maasai society was divided into two social groups, elders and warriors. The elders formed the ruling group. They met in periodic councils to decide on the affairs of the community and settle disputes. The warriors consisted of younger people who were mainly responsible for the protection of the tribe. They also organized cattle raids. Since cattle were in the wealth herds, raiding was an important aspect of their life. The British introduced a series of measures to administer the affair of the Maasai. Chiefs were appointed for the different subgroups of Maasai. The chiefs were made responsible for the affairs of the tribe. Several restrictions were imposed on trading and warfare. This led to erosion of authority for both elders and warriors. The chief appointed by the colonial government often accumulated wealth over time. They could now buy animals, goods and land. They also lent money to the needy. Many of them began living in towns and involved themselves in trade. Thus, the chiefs became more powerful. Okay friends, now we are going to conclude this session. Pastoral communities in different parts of the world are affected in variety different ways by changing in the modern world. New lands and new borders affect the patterns of their movement. They change the path of the annual movement, reduce their cattle numbers, press for right to enter new areas. They exert political pressure on the government for relief, subsidy and other forms of support and demand a right in the management of forest and water resources. They are not people who have no place in the modern world. Environmentalists and economists have increasingly come to recognize the pastoral nomads that is perfectly suited to many hilly and dry regions of the world. So, winding up this session, goodbye.